The desert sun was unforgiving, casting shadows that stretched longer than the truth itself. A woman lay bound in the dust, her cries ignored, her dignity stripped away, while the crowd stood silent. Not one hand reached to help. Not one soul dared intervene. But from the horizon, a lone cowboy rode closer, his silence carrying the weight of storms. What he did next would not only break her chains, but shake the conscience of everyone watching, forever. The West was never kind to the powerless. In the border towns, laws were often written not on paper but in blood, and those who suffered most rarely found justice. The woman had once believed in that justice. She had built a quiet life, working sunup to sundown, carving her place in a town that never fully welcomed her. She carried not just the burden of her work but also the weight of being different. Her heritage made her a target, her voice dismissed, her existence tolerated but never respected. On that fateful afternoon, the town gathered in the square. They watched as men of influence accused her of crimes she had not committed. They tied her down, parading her suffering as a warning, not a sentence. And still no one moved. Neighbors she had helped, families she had once fed, all lowered their eyes. Their silence was not weakness, it was complicity. But beyond the town's edge, a figure in a dust-stained hat had been watching. The cowboy was not a lawman, nor a hero from their dime novels. He was just a man scarred by his own past, carrying memories of injustices he could never forget. He saw in her the reflection of a world that had once turned its back on him, and that was enough. The cowboy dismounted, quietly, his boots sinking into the dry earth. Every step forward was deliberate, unhurried, and filled with the kind of tension that made even the guilty hesitate. The crowd shifted, whispers cutting through the air, but still no one stepped aside. The woman's eyes, tired but fierce, met his. For the first time that day, she saw not pity but resolve. He cut the rope with one clean stroke of his knife. Gasps echoed around them, but the cowboy did not flinch. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her trembling body. Dust clung to her skin, but it was her silence and her unbroken will that caught him. The men who had bound her roared in protest. They demanded answers. They threatened violence. But the cowboy stood tall, his shadow stretching wide, his presence alone daring them to act. This wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was about every injustice buried in that soil, every voice silenced, every crime justified by the color of someone's skin. The air was thick with fear, but also with the possibility of change. The woman, though weak, did not hide. Her presence at his side was defiance itself. Together, they faced the mob that had once believed her powerless. But the true cruelty was not in the ropes. It was in the silence of those who had stood by, mothers holding children close, fathers gripping their hats, young men with fire in their eyes but no courage in their hands. They all had a choice, and they all failed her. The cowboy's act was a mirror, forcing the town to confront itself. And as tension swelled, the unspoken question hung heavy. Would anyone finally step forward? The sheriff, a man too comfortable in his power, pushed through the crowd. His badge gleamed, but it carried no justice, only the authority to maintain the status quo. He demanded the cowboy step aside, insisting the woman was guilty, her freedom an insult to the town's order. But the cowboy did not move. He did not argue. He simply stood, his silence sharper than any weapon. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his holster, and for a moment the square held its breath. The sun burned hotter. The silence screamed louder. Then in a flash the cowboy drew. Not his gun, but his voice. He spoke words that cut deeper than any bullet. Words reminding them that justice was not the property of one man, nor the privilege of one color. That silence was betrayal. That courage meant standing for the ones the world would rather see broken. The sheriff faltered. The crowd froze. The weight of their complicity hung heavy on every shoulder. And then, a sound. One man, then another stepping forward. Not many, not enough, but some. The spell of silence had cracked. The cowboy's shocking move wasn't violence, it was forcing them to see, forcing them to choose. The woman walked away that day, untied not only from the ropes, but from the belief that she was alone. The scars of the ordeal would not fade quickly, but neither would the memory of the man who dared to defy silence. The cowboy did not stay. He never did. He left as quietly as he had arrived, disappearing into the horizon where justice was not a badge, but a burden carried by those willing to bear it. The town, however, could not forget. They had been forced to look at themselves, their silence, their fear, their complicity. Some would continue to live as they had before, but others would remember the weight of inaction and perhaps find courage the next time injustice stood before them. The woman's story spread beyond the dusty streets. It became a reminder that injustice thrives not just in cruelty but in silence. And sometimes it takes only one act, one shocking move, to break the chains that bind not just one, but many. History is filled with such moments, where silence is shattered and truth is revealed. And every time, the question lingers long after the story ends. When injustice rises again, who will stand and who will look away?